In this episode of the Limbo Latino podcast, we are hosting the scholar extraordinaire, Johanna Fernández, and this will be a multi-episode run of the total 2-hour interview. Yes, I dare say 2-hour interview that had me on edge every minute. So stay tuned for the upcoming episodes to come and continued conversations with one of the most important researchers and academics of our time. I hope you enjoy this lesson on our history and what's to come. Again, subscribe and do all the things to support the podcast, YouTube channel, and follow me on Instagram at _Limbo_Latino. And with that, enjoy this interview with the incomparable Johanna Fernández. Hola, mi gente. Once again, we are back. Welcome to the Limbo Latino podcast. And as you know, I'm your host, Joseph Colon, a.k.a. the Limbo Latino. And our sala, our living room, is going to be full today. And this is a part of our series to highlight the Young Lords. And as many of you all know, if you've read and or seen my other episodes, I'm big time into the Young Lords. Again, if you haven't heard my other episodes, please engage with the content and learn about one of the most important eras in our Latinx history. And today's guest is a historian, and her book about the Young Lords is a must read. No doubt one of the most profound pieces of scholarship and research that inspires and empowers the movement. As always, before we start, I need your support, and please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. Rate it a 5 because I know you're going to like it, and comment on the episode so we can start the dialogue as a community should. And this time, I ask you to share this episode with your friends and family and share it on social media. The more people engaging, the more visible our stories will be. And this show has always been about giving space for the diaspora, reframing our history, hearing from those movers and shakers you love so much, and ultimately this content reaching the masses. So make your way to our YouTube channel where you'll find the full-fledged extended version of this interview. And lastly, I dedicate this podcast to our ancestors, their contributions, and the sacrifices they make for us. So now onto the show. I am pleased and honored to have our guest, Dr. Johanna Fernández, join us on the Limbo Latino podcast. She is the Associate Professor of History at Baruch College of the City University of New York and author of the award-winning book, The Young Lords, A Radical History, on the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panther Party. Her book won the prestigious Frederick Jackson Turner Award for the best first book in history awarded by the Organization of American Histories and the 2021 American Book Award given by the Before Columbus Foundation, among other prizes that she's won. Dr. Fernández sued the NYPD in 2014 for its failure to release its surveillance records of the Young Lords to her. That suit led to the recovery of the lost Handschu files, the largest repository of police surveillance records in the country, namely over 1 million surveillance files of New Yorkers compiled by the NYPD between 1954 through 1972, including those of Malcolm X. She's the writer and executive producer of the film Justice on Trial, The Case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, and the editor of Writing of the Walls, Selected Prison Writings of Mumia Abu-Jamal. She's a long-standing leader in the movement to bring Mumia home. So without further ado, Dr. Johanna Fernández, I'd like to thank you for coming in. I will be pulling him into the stream. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Now, I know I told you this before, and I'll keep saying it again and again. Your book actually just revolutionized the way that I look at not only the Young Lords Party, but also the way that I really engage history and reframing history. So I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm delighted. This is what I like to hear.
Good.
A lifetime writing the book. And so I want to hear that people are reading it and that it's transforming consciousness. I wrote it for a new generation of young people in this country, of Latinx folks, of everyone interested in change.
I highly recommend any listener or watcher to buy the book immediately. Literally page turner nonstop. So I was a fiend when I got it. And so I actually still read it over and over again. So I wanted to let you know that I know I'm fan basing a lot of this, but this is really truly a scholarly work that I think is by far one of the best works I've read in a very, very long time. So I'm excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, we'll
no,
talk
no,
about.
yeah, for sure. So about your masterpiece, I want to really engage that, but I also want people to know who you are. So on my show, I like to start us off with simple prompts and allow the listeners and viewers to understand your background and how your identities connect and just to get to know you a little bit better. So my first question to you and or prompt is actually, can you tell me your story and your background, where you grew up and how that connects?
Can I tell you my story? Lord Jesus, your story. So many of them. And we're constantly rewriting our story. And after having finished writing this book, I'm like, oh my God, who the hell am I now? I'm not writing the book. So I grew up in the Bronx. I was born and raised in the Bronx. I'm a child of immigrants. My parents are from the Dominican Republic. A lot of people think that I'm Puerto Rican because I write about the Puerto Rican young lords, but I'm Dominican. And interestingly enough, the reason why I connected with the young lords is because they were the children of migrants then, much like I was the child of migrants, right? After 1947, a third of the people of the island of Puerto Rico were pushed out by Operation Bootstrap, a US industrialization project of the island. And they settled in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, and along the northeastern corridor of the United States. So the young lords are the children of that migration. And I was a child of the migration of Dominicans to this country in large numbers after the US invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965. So, okay, so I was born in the Bronx. You know, my parents are working class people. I studied in the public schools of New York City. They were quite hairy. I don't know where you're from, but you know what it's like.
I'm from Brooklyn, so I know the pre-gentrified Fort Greene. So
Right,
that's
exactly. Free gentrified Bronx. And so, you know, it was quite something to be raised in that town. Somehow I studied in the worst public schools in the country and was educated in the most elite universities. And so I landed at Brown University, which is why, ironically, I have a connection to the Young Lords, because it took me going all the way to Providence, Rhode Island, to an elite institution to learn about the Young Lords, even though the Young Lords were running the streets in the Bronx, occupied a hospital in 1970. So that's it. I came of age politically at Brown, like occupied buildings against the university's admissions policy, which was discriminatory. And I wanted to understand the world. And somehow I thought that going to graduate school would help in that process. Not always the case, but I'm glad that I made the decision to go to graduate school. I can say a lot more about who I am. Ultimately, I'm a person who likes to understand the root causes of problems, all kinds of problems, like our interpersonal problems, relationship problems, why the economy is the way it is, history, you name it. I like to get into it. And I'm committed to mastery, I think. And I try to live up to that. Not easy. And you know, being a perfectionist is not a good thing because it takes a lifetime time to do what you would otherwise do, in 10 years. But that's who I am. And I think that who I am is really changing in this period. So talk to me in 2 years and I might have another answer for you.
Well, I'll make sure I take you up on that. I agree. I think we're ever evolving and changing. So I appreciate that honesty. I see Angela Davis in the background, and I see she's obviously an influence on you. But when thinking about those folks who shaped you in your upbringing and even in your current state of flux and as far as learning self, who are those people that you really lean on? I know that you've done a lot of social justice work, particularly with Mumia Abu-Jamal, and just can you talk a little bit about the influential moments of your life that really, threw you into this work?
Wow. Okay. So 2 different questions there. Moments and people. I would say that my father is probably the most influential person in my life. My father grew up in poverty in the Dominican Republic, orphaned at the age of 6, and somehow found his way to the United States. He was in the Navy, and at some point during his life, he shared a story of the fact that he was a cook on the ship that belonged to Leonidas Trujillo, the dictator. Yeah, told me all kinds of incredible stories about hardship and what it means to be human and why it's important to be of use to society. He's inspired me. He's no longer with us, but he kept the oral tradition alive with all the stories he blessed me with when he was here with us. So my father, Angela Davis is a heroine of mine. So many people, I do a lot of work around the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, the veteran Black Panther and political prisoner who's been in prison for 40 years, spent 28 and a half years on death row, framed by the American government. I mean, I'm influenced by everything that aspires to improve our lives and society. Now, the moments that put me in this trajectory that led to the completion of the book, I guess I'll have to start with Brown. So when I was a junior or a sophomore, a junior in college, Brown hired its first Latinx studies professor, which is crazy, right? That it took that long. And that was Professor Suzanne Obeler. And she introduced me to the Young Lords. She taught a class called, I think, Latina Women Writers, and then another class on Latinx history. And in the Latinx history class, I learned about the Young Lords, and I was shocked that I'd never heard about this organization. Badass, took over buildings and hospitals and churches, accomplished so much in so little time, populated by very, very young people, younger than me when I was in college, like 13, 14, 15-year-olds and college-aged kids. So that's really the experience that led to my knowledge about the Young Lords and my desire to write the history when I decided to go to graduate school and get a PhD. And then after I finished my PhD, I took a teaching job, actually a postdoctoral fellowship at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. And the first day that I'm in town, there's a speaker whose name escapes me now, the leader of the Black Panther Party, Brown. She wrote A Taste of Power. So maybe you can look it up. So she was speaking on campus. And I'm like, okay, I need to go listen to this woman. And I knew very little about who she was as an individual. Of course, I knew about her book, A Taste of Power. I show up to a packed room of students, but also Black Americans who were visiting the campus to hear her speak from the Hill District. That's the Black American neighborhood in Pittsburgh. Packed. Students invited her, but they had no clue that she was going to draw so many people in. They did not have anything prepared. They didn't have an introduction. They didn't have a podium. They didn't have a microphone. I mean, it's the most hilarious moment of my academic life, because she is invited to the podium or whatever, to the front of the room to give the talk. And she's literally handed a mic, and she says, I know that you guys think that I'm Black, and because I'm Black, I'm going to sing a song, but I'm actually going to give a talk. And so I'm going to need a podium. And so the students are going crazy. They get her a podium. Then they're like, okay, here's Elaine Brown. I remember, here's Elaine Brown. And she's like, oh, someone's going to have to introduce me. I mean, do you know who I am? Toom, 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 toom. Wait. At some point, I get up and I introduce her. I was like petrified. I was embarrassed. And I sat down. She took the stage, or the podium at this point. And at the end of that meeting, David Demarest, who is a professor emeritus at Carnegie Mellon, a retired professor, approached me. And he said, you have to go visit Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's not far from here, just an hour on death row at SCI Green. And I'm like, you mean Mumia Abu-Jamal sitting up on death row? That same one? And, you know, I had removed myself from political work, and I was a little hesitant. David Demarest had another, idea about how I would be spending my time in Pittsburgh. And he came to my office almost every day. I was always in my office, and he came to my office. We chatted. And at the end, he was like, are you ready? Can you write to him? What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Are you going to commit to going to see him? After a month of this back and forth, I finally threw the towel in. And I started visiting Mumia Abu-Jamal on death row. And visiting someone on death row is like going to church, confession. It's just a pretty intense process. You see a different face of American society, of the monstrosity of American society. And here I am, like more than 15 years later, committed to abolition and committed to living in a world in which prisons won't be necessary. So, and because I remain connected to the grassroots in the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, but also other political prisoners, including Oscar Lopez Rivera, the Puerto Rican political prisoner. Because I remain connected to a movement, I wrote this book in a different way. You know, when you're connected to struggle, you interpret, understand, and write history differently. And so this book has gotten 5 awards. 3 of them are awards of the Organization of American Historians. And I'm completely humbled by that, because I think of myself as someone who's in the academy, not of it. So to be honored and recognized by this organization of my, profession it was shocking. Like, I was in the Dominican Republic, by the way, when I got the letter that I had gotten the Frederick Jackson Turner Award, which is the top award in the profession among American historians. Never in my life did I imagine that this was going to happen. I remember that I was driving from the northeast corridor of the Dominican Republic to the capital, this gorgeous highway. And I was driving, reading my email, not a good thing. And I had to stop I was like, what? I had to stop at the side of the road and take my breath. It means something. And I wanted to write a book that was recognized by the profession. I wanted it to be impeccably written, researched, so that this history would be read, right? So that this book wouldn't be another book that about this important history that is going to be swept aside. And hopefully I've done that.
I cannot reiterate that this book is life changing. It's a really amazing book, and so I can see why the Academy and and folks are really chiming in on this, because it is revolutionary, not only in its history but also in the way that you wrote it. Now I understand what you just said to me about being a part of the struggle and really just understanding and looking at it from a different lens, how that book was so poignant, especially in my, again, I'm reading it from my own perspective, but you have enough accolades that would also add value to what I'm saying, which is it makes a whole lot of sense that you are coming at it from a way different perspective than maybe some of your contemporaries, right? That people just write books and research and aren't necessarily in the social justice struggle and really engaging in the work like you did. And so that's why this book reads different. It reads like an expert who not only put themselves out there, but also put their heart there, which is not typical in the sense of scholarly work. You put your heart, soul, you bleed, you do all this, but this one reads a little differently. And I thank you for highlighting that for me, because I was trying to figure out why this book is so different. Why am I adjusting to it differently than the other books around the Young Lords? And I think it's because it had more heart and soul than I've read it in other depictions of it. So
I think it's more important for me to hear that from a lay reader, right, than anything else, because ultimately I wrote a book not for the 10 people in my profession. I wrote the book so that it would speak to everybody, professors and podcast personalities like yourself, and just the person in the street. And I like to say that I left my little bleeding heart in the book. Yeah, it's a book with heart. And I read that in one of the reviews of the book, that there are blind reviews of the book. And the reviewer said something like, this is a book, literally, you don't hear those words in the Academy. This is a book with heart, and there is emotion in it. And yet it is thoroughly researched and academic. Yeah, I mean, listen, if it doesn't have heart, don't come to the party.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, for those who haven't read your book and will hopefully read it now that we, really dissected it, can you talk a little bit about maybe some nuggets around your book, or especially around the Young Lords, that you really, isn't commonplace knowledge about, and some of the things that were brought up, who were the Young Lords, and why is it important for us to really, especially now in this day and age, to really reframe history?
So the people who changed the world in the 1960s are known as the New Left. This young generation of people who grew up in the post-World War II period. They came of age. They were going to college in the 1960s. These are the people who built the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the movement against the Vietnam War, the women's movement, the gay and lesbian liberation movement, the sexual revolution. Those people are known as the New Left. And I have demonstrated, I think, that the Young Lords were one of the most important and successful organizations of the New Left. That generation of radicals, revolutionaries, activists who changed the culture of American society, who changed the relationship between the people and the government and challenged U.S. foreign policy, who changed the relationship between white Americans and Americans of color, Black people in particular. but also Puerto Ricans, other Latinos, Mexicans, Asians, Native Americans, and who introduced an analysis and understanding of gender in American society. So there was a cultural transformation as a result of their intervention. And the Young Lords, from what I learned, is one of the most successful and dynamic organizations within the New Left. They are the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panthers, and they were the children of the Puerto Rican migration that, as I said previously, began en masse after 1947, when the U.S. industrialization project in the island of Puerto Rico failed to absorb as many peasants and farmers as it displaced. And it had an escape valve. The folks who masterminded that program knew that there were going to be a lot of people left on the outside, and those people they expected would be funneled to New York to work in the factories, to Chicago, and to Philadelphia and other cities. So they were the children of that migration. And the Young Lords are remembered first because they identified with the most iconic organization of the period, the Black Panthers, right? Which is not an easy thing to do, right? If you think Latinos are listening to this, and we all know that when Latinos come to the United States, and Latinos who have been here longstanding, Latinos and other migrants, not just Latinos, but from wherever you are in the world, when you get here, you learn that Black Americans are the third rail. You don't want to touch them. You don't want to be associated with them because you've got enough problems. You don't speak the language, you're an outsider, and now you're going to be associated with this demonized, demeaned group. Well, the Young Lords, the Chicago Young Lords, decided to make common cause with the Black Panthers. And for that reason, we remember them today, right? So that's important to say, that this is the Puerto Rican counterpart of the Black Panther Party. And the Young Lords are also remembered because they asked that quintessential existential question and answered it for their generation. Who am I? Who am I? And what's my relationship to this country? And why are we on the outside? And why are my parents here? Like, why did they come? Because they seem miserable. They asked and answered that question for their generation. They were community-based activists who also fought for the liberation of Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the United States. Most Americans don't know that. They were self-proclaimed socialists, and they did a lot of work at the level of the community, both in Chicago. In Chicago, the Young Lords had a pretty successful and well-regarded medical clinic for the community, long-standing, like that was around for a number of years. And in New York, the Young Lords are credited with drafting the first known patient bill of rights, alongside of doctors and workers and people in the community in the Bronx at Lincoln Hospital, the hospital they occupied. Think about that. Like, if you go into a hospital today in the United States, you're going to see a patient bill of rights. And the Young Lords drafted the first known patient bill of rights and came up with the idea. That's pretty huge. They are credited with the passage of anti-lead poisoning legislation in New York, their activism and militancy and muckraking. They also theorized racism in Latin America as a product of colonial rule under the Spaniards, slavery, and the displacement and massacre of Native Americans. So they figured out what that racism looked like and compared it to the racism and the ideology behind racism that emerges in the United States under British colonial rule, right? The notion that a drop of black blood makes you black emerges here in the United States, and in Latin America, it's the opposite. A drop of white blood brings you closer to the white ideal, right? And so they tried to explain why Black Americans and Afro-Latinos and Puerto Ricans and other Latinx folks, why we think about race so differently. They also put that issue of racism in Latin America and amongst Latinos front and center. This is taboo. This is a subject still today that's relegated to like hushed whispers. And they brought the taboo into the living room, into the Limbo Latino living room. Let's talk about it. They did a lot of work around women's liberation and the oppression of women in Latin America and in Latino communities. And they were the first group of people to begin to use the term Latin and Latino in the 1960s and 70s. And they thought about a pan-Latino identity. But what's even most impressive about the Young Lords, and there's a lot, I can't summarize it in however long we've got, but they were ahead of their time in that 30% of the organization here in New York, approximately 25 to 30%, was composed of Black Americans. And another like 5% was composed of Dominicans and Colombians and Cubans and Panamanians. So this was an organization that was really multi-ethnic. I mean, this is what the contemporary city looks like. The contemporary city did not look like that the city did not look like that diverse ethnically. And yet they reflected, the dynamism of contemporary urban culture and its demographics in the organization, and believed in solidarity among people of color oppressed by racism and white supremacy. But they were also about exposing class divisions in society among people of color and in white society. Society is divided by classes, the rich and the rest of us, and the poor, right? And that has a huge impact, and it determines what our experiences look like. So, and of course, these ideas were not new, but they made them popular in El Barrio, as did the Black Panthers, right? In their communities, in Black American communities. So there's so much more. They were also the children of Che Guevara and the Cuban Revolution. And so the book is as much about the Young Lords as it is about the 1960s and everything you need to know about the 1960s. It's also a political or intellectual history of the ideas of the period. Like, where did all these ideas come from? Like, I learned this when I was researching, that the Black Panthers and the Young Lords called the hood the colony. Where did that come from? Like, how did they reach that conclusion, and why were they using that language? And what was happening in the world? This was a moment of wars and revolutions against European colonial rule in Asia and Africa. And those revolutions in Vietnam, in Algeria, in South Africa, those movements influenced the civil rights and Black Power movements. And the ideas of those revolutions became dominant. So what were those ideas? And how did they envision a different world, and how they would get there? So the book is about the Young Lords, but it's also about New York. It's about Chicago. It's about this period. It's also about the Herculean transformation of a gang of young Puerto Rican and Mexican youth in Chicago into a political organization. And that's the genesis of the Young Lords. It was a gang in 1959 that then was transformed into a political organization by Chacha Jimenez. It's one of its leaders who worked with Fred Hampton, the chairman of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. And the Young Lords was the linchpin of the Rainbow Coalition. For Fred Hampton, it was the emergence of the Young Lords that made possible this idea of the Rainbow Coalition, a coalition among poor whites from Appalachia, Black Americans in the Black Panther Party, and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in the Young Lords, a coalition across racial lines on the basis of shared class interests, and so much more. So yeah, that is the first chapter of the organization, like how all of that happens. And I tell the story of Chicago through the life of Chacha Jimenez, my favorite Young Lord. Yeah, like, wow.
Wow is right. She took the words right out of my mouth. That is the first episode of this multi-interview with Johanna Fernández. I hope you had a great time. I look forward to hosting you next week with a new episode. And con esto te veo. Peace.